Thank you all for joining. The webinar will begin at noon. Thank you for joining. The webinar will begin at noon.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Bend Chamber of Commerce webinar today on the PPP round 2.0, and it feels like round 5.0 or 10.0 to our illustrious panel here today, who've all been working on finding funds and getting them into the hands of Bend and Central Oregon businesses here for going on 9-10 months now since this pandemic hit and federal government responded. A lot to talk about today in what is different this time around, and I'm so glad that you all are joining us. Just a reminder that we put this on YouTube and make it available to folks to view. If you know of a business out there who's hurting, who could use some funds, thought maybe PPP might be something they wanted to consider and wanted a little more insight, feel free to share the link to the YouTube, and it'll also be on our Bend Chamber website, and let's get the word out that this money is available. Before we get going, today I'd like to thank Ben Broadband. They are sponsoring this webinar, and they allow us to bring so much of this content out to you folks for free and get it into the community for the greater good and to help in the recovery of our Ben businesses and our community as a whole. So thank you again to Ben Broadband. So before I get into introducing the panel, I wanted to just one more time go over the how to get your questions in. We have a Q&A button and a chat button. Go to the Q&A button. That's where we take all the questions after the panel is done. And I'll look at those and try to get to every one of them if I can. And if we can't, I apologize in advance, but we'll try and get to as many as possible. I have another favor too. If you would add a little bit of information, one sentence of whether you applied for a PPP the last time around and whether or not you're actually contemplating doing that this time around would be really useful for us to know. We're already noticing, we were talking before we went on live today, that there are a lot of differences this time around in who is applying and how quickly those applications are coming in. So really curious about your experience from your end. So I want to introduce our panel today. Lisa Kyle is with the SBDC, Small Business Development Center, over at the Community College, Central Oregon Community College. And she is the Network Capital Access Team Regional Advisor. In real people words, she is the person you want to call if you need money and want to find out how to get it. She's great. I know she and Ken Betchart and the whole team over there have been helping out hundreds of Central Oregon businesses over the past year in trying to navigate the virus and how to keep on their feet. Wendy McGrain, Vice President of Commercial Banking Team, leader at Central and Eastern Oregon region of US Bank. Wendy has been with us on webinars and in a lot of chamber events in the past, and it's really good to have you back today, Wendy. Gary O'Connell, Summit Bank Market President for Central Oregon region. He's going to talk a little bit about Summit Bank and the application process there also from a banker standpoint. And with him is Ashley Horner. She is Senior Vice President and SBA Program Administrator at Summit Bank. So she's the person that you probably will be talking with most if you are applying for one of the PPP loans through Summit. Thanks to every one of you for being here today. There's a lot of information. We're going to try and get that to you as practically and as quickly as possible so we can get to Q&A, but I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot as we go along. So I'd like to kick it off with Lisa Kyle. So Lisa's going to be going over an overview of really what is this PPP, what are the nuances that are different this time around, and just an overview of what it is and what they're trying to accomplish as far as federal aid. She's going to talk a little bit about the rules and regulations around the loan and the EIDL, and I can't remember what that stands for. She's going to
Economic Injury Disaster Loan.
Thank you. Thank you. God, just went right out of my head. And so she's going to give you some information on that and the forgiveness of that program as well. So Lisa, I'm going to let you take it away, and thanks for being here.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. So this is PPP funding and assistance. There is a ton of information here. I've got slides and they will be available to everybody who listens to this. So you may see me skipping through slides and skipping over some information that's detail oriented. We're going to try and give a broad overview of this program. I'd also like to thank our funding partners at SBA and Business Oregon and Central Oregon Community College. They allow us to do the free advising that we do. Couple of caveats up front. What's included here is what we know right now. Information is coming out fast and furious, just like it did last year. A ton of stuff just came out Tuesday night. So things are changing quickly. We're giving you what we know now, but things can change. So be patient. And as always, you should consult with your CPA, your attorney, and your banker before making any major decisions. So what's the CARES Act? That was authorized last year, and beginning on April 3rd of last year, the SBA was providing forgivable loans, PPP, Paycheck Protection Program. The intent of that was to help small businesses keep their workers on payroll. And there are certain rules that if you qualify, if you follow the rules and do what they say, then the loan is completely forgiven. And a lot of people have received forgiveness so far from what I hear. The loans are funded and originated by banks and other lenders, but it's guaranteed by SBA. You're going to see a lot of PPP anachronisms here in this on these slides. PPP by itself refers to the loans made in 2020 last year. PPP 1 is the new draw, which was effective last Monday, January 11th, and PPP 2 is the second draw, which was authorized also, and it was also became live last Monday. It's important to know about all the PPP loans. No collateral is required. You don't sign a personal guarantee. You do have to certify that your business was indeed in need and that these monies will help you support ongoing operations. Another thing, you can only have one pending loan application. One of the things that we saw last year was someone would apply for a loan with one lender and then maybe it wasn't going as fast as they thought maybe it should be. They panicked and went across the street and applied with another lender. So what happens is when a lender gets an application, once they approve it, they input it into SBA's portal. So now all of a sudden SBA is getting 2 loan applications from one borrower, and that raises red flags. We don't want to do that. So if you decide to apply at another lender, you need to withdraw your first application. Okay, so first draw loans. This is for businesses that did not apply last year, or they returned it, or they didn't accept the full amount. They may now reapply or request the full amount. I'm calling that PPP 1. The loan amount is based on your average monthly payroll for the last 12 months prior to the loan, or 2019 or 20, and you multiply that by 2. So it's basically 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. Maximum loan amount, $10 million. If the loan's not forgiven, you have a loan with your lender at 1% interest for 5 years. The eligible businesses are the same as last year. However, they've added 501c6s, which are business organizations like our Chamber of Commerce, destination marketing organizations, and housing co-ops with no more than 300 employees. The business applicant must have been in operation February 15th of 2020. You have to have less than 500 employees. However, eligible news organizations and businesses with NAICS codes beginning with 72, those are accommodations and food services, may have no more than 500 employees per physical location. And the average net income for the 2 fiscal years prior to the application does not exceed $5 million. How do you apply? Go down to your local lender. Not physically, sorry. Most lenders have their forms online and they're requiring online submission. If you have any questions, talk to your lender. I've included a link to the SBA application form so you can take a look at it and see what they're going to be looking for. There will be some documentation required to support some of your numbers. Important thing to remember is that the complete applications have to be submitted by March 31st of this year or before funds run out. Last year, we had funds running out. I'm not sure what the tempo of loans this year is, so check with your lenders. And I'm sure Wendy and Ashley and Gary have some information on that. Second draw loans are to provide additional funds for businesses who already applied for a PPP last year, and they've used it all up, or they expect to use it all up by the time that they would expect to get their funds from a PPP 2. So if you're almost used it all up, you can apply for a PP2 just so long as you're pretty sure you're going to use it all up by the time you get your PPP2. And you have to certify that you have or will use all of your PPP1. Same rules apply if it's spent on eligible expenses. It can be forgivable. Eligible businesses are the same, obviously, because you've already gotten a PPP1. But some changes this time around. If you're going for your second PPP, you can only have 300 employees, and there's a reduction in receipts test. You have to demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts comparing between last year and this year, or between comparable quarters last year and this year, 2019 and 20, or annually in some cases. There's some detail on this slide right here that talks about how to calculate the reduction. I'm not going to go into that. Just know that for loans above 150,000, you have to provide that documentation supporting that reduction at the time of application. If your loan application is for less than 150, you provide that documentation upon forgiveness. The loan amounts for PPP2 are the same as for PPP1. It's the average eligible payroll costs, average monthly eligible payroll costs for the last 12 months multiplied by 2.5. However, for NAICS codes beginning in 72, again, that's accommodation and food service, it's multiplied by 3.5 because SBA is trying to help those businesses that have been hit so hard by this pandemic. Also, the loan amount maximum is $2 million on PPP2. Applying is the same way as with the PPP1. Talk to your lender or go online. Know that if you apply with the same lender that you got your first PPP with, and you're using fiscal year 2019 numbers, you may not need to provide new payroll information. So that might speed things up a little bit. It's worth looking at. Deadline's the same, March 31st or before funds run out. For both PPP 1 and 2, there are some businesses that are ineligible, including those engaged in illegal activity as defined by federal, state, or local law. And this is where you have the cannabis warning. Household employers, any time that you or an owner of your business has had a delinquency or a loss to the federal government within the last 7 years. Criminal history, there's some new stuff. There's a link here that talks about ownership by citizens of Hong Kong or China. Use of the funds on both of these is the same. As I mentioned, it has to be used within 8 to 24 weeks, beginning with the date that the business receives the loan funds. And so the date the money goes into your account, that's when your 8 to 24 weeks begins. And there's a lot of flexibility. It can be 8 weeks, it can be 10, it can be 24, anywhere in between. And 60% has to be spent on qualifying payroll expenses and the other 40% on other eligible expenses. You do need to keep in mind that you need to maintain your FTE employee count and compensation levels. There are some safe harbors available if you cannot replace an employee. For instance, you have an employee that went out on maternity leave and then decided not to come back, or they went to work somewhere else and you can't hire a replacement. So those are safe harbors there. But if you can't make the safe harbor, then forgiveness might be reduced. There's a lot of detail in here on eligible payroll costs. Just remember it's payroll. It includes group health benefits, which does include vision and dental. That was clarified recently. Retirement benefits. Next page talks about ineligible payroll costs, and anyone that earns more than $100,000 annualized. Only up to that 100,000 is eligible as part of your payroll costs. So you'll need to prorate that. Other eligible expenses include interest on long or short-term debt incurred before February 15th, rent, utilities, other services for which services began before February 15th. They've added on PPE, personal protection equipment, or facility modifications like those big pieces of plexiglass that you see. So the cost of those can be included, as can some supplier costs, in addition covered property damage costs that are not covered by insurance or other compensation, like for looting or public disturbances. Excuse me. Those are eligible costs, and those would be the payroll costs would be 60%, and the other costs are the 40%. You may also finance an EIDL loan that was made between January 31st and April 3rd of last year on your PPP1, not your PPP2. I mentioned forgiveness earlier, so I'm not going to go through this again. Getting loan forgiveness, how do you do that? The banks have pretty much, they're in the driver's seat on this one. Most of them have online portals, so check with your lender and see what they've got. You do need to submit the forgiveness request within 10 months of the end of your covered period, which is the 8 to 24 weeks from the date the loan is funded. So if you go 24 weeks, add 10 months to that, you have to apply for forgiveness by that date. When the banks receive their your application for forgiveness, they have 60 days to make a decision. They then submit it to SBA, who then has 90 days. So I hear they're doing it. The banks are moving relatively quickly, and actually SBA has been too, so that's all good news. If your loan's not forgiven or a portion of it's not forgiven, you'll owe that money back to your lender in the form of a loan at 1% over 5 years, and there are no prepayment penalties or fees. That's PPP 1 and 2 in a nutshell. There were some tax provision changes that were made under the Act on December 27th. One of them reverses that IRS ruling, so it does allow tax deduction for regular business expenses that were paid for with loan proceeds, and it clarifies that your loan forgiveness is not taxable income. It also says that those EIDL Advance grants are not included in taxable income. Anytime you're talking about taxes, talk to your CPA or tax advisor. They're the experts on that. Last year, people who received both an EIDL advance and a PPP loan, when they went for forgiveness, they found that the amount of the advance had to be deducted from the amount of forgiveness. So let's say they had a $3,000 EIDL advance. So they applied for forgiveness. It was 100% forgiven, but they've got that $3,000 EIDL advance. They wound up with a $3,000 5-year loan at 1%. That has been changed. Those will be forgiven, and we are told that you will not have to pay this back, but we're still waiting on guidance from SBA as to how they technically will be handling that. Another thing people may have heard about is the targeted EIDL advance. Nobody needs to do anything on this. If you applied for an EIDL advance last year and you got less than $10,000, or you applied and received nothing because funding was gone, SBA will be reaching out to you if you qualify. And qualify means you're located in a low-income community, and we don't have details on that yet. And you can demonstrate a more than 30% reduction in revenue during a certain period. Again, you don't need to take any action at this time. SBA will do that. That is pretty much my technical presentation. I've got some websites here that are helpful. This first one here, the US Treasury, is probably the best one. It's got anything and everything you ever wanted to know about PPP, reams and reams of pages, but it is good information. There's some other websites here, and the very last one is, well, actually a couple of them on this page. The SBA size standards is good. The NAICS code lookup is good. And if anybody is looking for some free advising at COCC's SBDC, there's a link there. That's it. And thank you for bearing with all of this information.
That was really helpful, Lisa. Thanks so much for that high-level overview. And I know that there are a lot of folks that are really interested in applying for these loans. And I know to a lot of people, it's also pretty perplexing and a little overwhelming. Just want to point out that Lisa and the SBDC and your bank, they're there to help and help walk you through all of this. And also, you didn't have to memorize every slide. And if you're like me, I usually have my phone taking pictures of slides when I can't write it down fast enough. But no worries, we'll be sending this out, including the slides, after today's webinar, so you'll have access to this PowerPoint. So next up is Gary O'Connell and Ashley Horner, both from Summit Bank, and they're going to give you the perspective. Excuse me? Oh, sorry, thought I heard somebody. And they're both going to give you the perspective of what it's like to be a banker. They're going to tag team this segment because they both have different pieces of this with Summit Bank. They're going to review the lessons that they learned from the first round and share some logistics around Summit Bank's PPP application process to get a good idea of what this is going to look like. Also, debunk any fake claims regarding PPP funding and share information regarding the timeline in addition to what Lisa just shared with you. So I'm going to go ahead, Gary and Ashley, hand this over to you, and thanks for being here.
Katie, thank you for having us, and to the Ben Chamber and the sponsors. Lisa, Kyle, you covered a lot of ground there in a short period of time, and we understand the challenge. We went over the agenda and we said, how in the world are we going to squeeze all this into a short period of time? So we decided to focus on some of the nuances that we think are important to a borrower or an applicant. As you may know, the applications for second draw and for first draw were released on Friday, the 8th of January. When that happened, our bank, Summit Bank, we immediately distributed the applications to our clients, which we had already been in discussions with and vetting and preparing them for the second iteration, which we all knew was coming. And that's given us a really good perspective. Our bank took a co-pilot approach on this with our clients because there's always a lot of back and forth. How do I do this, and what entities qualify and under what circumstances? So we had a lot of those dialogues. Last weekend, we submitted all of our applications, and to date, we have 83% of our applications processed, approved. They have SBA loan numbers, and they're going to fund next week. And so what we wanted to do is share some of those nuances that if you're still out there preparing an application or going through the process, what are just a few things that might be helpful to you? The first one is have your, and forgive me for overstating the obvious in some of these, but entity documents and having your signing authorities in order, establishing a direct contact and communication plan with your financial institution. We all do that a little bit differently, but we're all in this together in that regard. Reconciled payroll records, we call those your 941s typically. Some of you second draw borrowers might have those already on file, as Lisa mentioned, and use those again. Know your NACIS code, and Ashley's going to talk more about that. There are some small things to remember on that piece. If you are second draw PPP, it's helpful to know your first draw SBA loan number, so have access to that. In our case, we kept our files active from first draw and helped clients with that, but that's an important piece of data to put in there. Last but not least, it's more, I'll stop here, but you can't change your loan amounts. We looked at scores of interim final reviews from SBA, and the math is the math. And we've had a few folks say, call and say, well, my PPP is for 160,000. Can I lower it to 145 so I can use that one-page forgiveness that's expedited for 150 and under? And the answer is, we're going with the math, and we want it to reconcile with your first draw with your second draw. So in terms of lessons learned, I'll just say, this has been like Groundhog's Day for the last 10 months. I think it was Friday, April 1st. I was driving to work. I think that's the first day the portal opened. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, or anyone else, but I was driving. I'm not much of a crier, but I was driving to work, and this small business owner was asking me. She called crying, am I going to get this PPP? And I said yes. To be honest, I wasn't quite sure because nobody knew, but I said yes, and then I started crying, and it was just a real moment, and I'll never forget that. It wasn't the last time I did that, but we had a lot of those conversations, as did a lot of the bankers, on how real this is in terms of impact. And you think of faces and names and people in the local community, and that just all brings it home and more than makes it worth it. I hope I'm speaking for all of us that we just had to do this. So with that, I do want to turn it over for the last couple minutes to Ashley. Ashley's our SBA program administrator. She's been in the eye of the storm for the last 10 months.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Ben Chamber, for allowing us this opportunity to provide some information to the individuals that are going to be viewing this. It is, as Gary said, we're all in this together. So if we can be of any assistance, please let us know. The piece I'm going to kind of touch on really briefly, because I know we have a lot of questions that are already populating in the chat and in the Q&A area, is some commonly asked questions and a couple little tweaks that happen with this. I think what Lisa covered in those minutes is phenomenal, and please take time to review her slides, because that was a wonderful, wonderful recap. She needs a glass of water after that. She spoke so quickly and so eloquently. So a couple common questions that we are getting pretty repetitively here at the bank is you cannot choose your loan amount. So Gary touched on that one. Another one is, which payroll period do I use? Do I use 2020? Do I use 2019? And you as a borrower, you can choose, assuming you were open for both of those years. So run the math for both of them and which one you would prefer. It's really up to you. It's not up to your lender. They also, with this new round, they really stepped on the base of what a seasonal business is. I think this is very impactful, especially for your community, specifically the Central Oregon community. The definition for a seasonal business, and there's one of two, so you can choose one of two. One is if you're not in operation for more than 7 months in any calendar year, or you earn your gross receipts, your revenue, 1/3 of it comes in 6 months and the other 2/3 come in another 6 months. They don't have to be butted up against months. So I just think of seasonal hospitality, ski, restaurants perhaps. So seasonality, that we have a lot of borrowers that are able to really utilize the seasonality math for their loan amount. And the way that their math ends up working for their loan amount is it's 12 weeks, 12 consecutive weeks of payroll. And then you use the monthly average of those 12 weeks. So, and it's 12 weeks between February 15 of 2019 and February 15 of 2020. So it's a really great opportunity for those seasonal businesses in our community of Central Oregon to perhaps get a little bit more money to be able to utilize for all those uses that Lisa explained that we can use the funds for. Another thing that I would like to just briefly touch on, I was on the phone this morning with Steve Kacharski, and he's the director of SBA's Office of Performance and System Management. He basically, him and his crew build the interfaces and the way that these programs end up talking to each other SBA wise. And it was just Steve and I for 30 minutes. It was wonderful. One thing that's really changed with this draw that just everybody to take a little patient pause is there was elements of fraud that were unfortunately peppered throughout the original PPP program. And what's happening now is they're doing a lot of fraud detection on the front end. Frankly, they're taking the data that US Bank and Summit Bank and all of our banks push into the system, and they're bumping it up against US Treasury, and they're bumping it up against a system that us bankers call LexisNexis. So they're looking at public records and they're looking at do not pay individuals. So there's going to be some additional guidance that's going to flow out of this to help reconcile if people end up in this aired category where they can't get their funds so rapidly. So if you are going to be applying for these, I mean, the money's there for that purpose, but just be patient that it might not feel as quick, if you will, as compared to what happened in 2020. There could be some reconciling of some information that may be, you know, a mismatch, frankly. With no disrespect to our wonderful chief credit administrator, we were helping one individual that he knows quite well, and he came back as deceased. So we have, I mean, that's just one example of some things that we're going to have to all as a community be patient to work through. With that, I'll turn it back over to Katie, which I think is going to go to Wendy, and definitely here for any questions, of course, and happy to help the community.
Thanks, Ashley and Gary. That was great. Wendy McGrain is up next. She's with US Bank. She's going to cover why there's urgency surrounding this PPP bundle that's coming up. Encourage everybody in need to apply while highlighting US Bank's prioritization on business owners of color, minority business owners, and share logistics around US Bank's process for applying and receiving these loans, and just give you a different perspective from a different bank. And so, Wendy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Are you able to hear me okay? Excellent. Well, hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here with this group today to educate our community about these programs and this funding that is available to so many employers here in Central Oregon and frankly across the nation. And my goal, and really our goal as a bank, is to make sure that every eligible entity is educated about how you can seek this funding and seek this support, because so many entities need it right now. My role is I manage the commercial and business banking team for US Bank, based here in Bend, overseeing all of Central and Eastern Oregon. And we have a number of bankers who are specialists in understanding all of these loan programs and are working furiously to help our clients and frankly, any entities that are seeking funding to be able to obtain this funding right now. A few things that might be helpful to also share, as Lisa shared at the beginning of her presentation, the CARES Act allocated $284.4 billion to go through to offer PPP 1s and PPP 2s. And that funding is available through March 31st or when it runs out. And then Gary touched on the urgency and the concern that happened with the initial round of funding in 2020. And that absolutely happened because there were multiple rounds of funding that Congress did pass. And there was the initial round with the first CARES Act that was passed in March did run out on April 15th. But just to make sure that all of you listening are aware, that funding was replenished with another act of Congress. And unlike the first round of funding, when the PPP program ended in August of 2020, $525 billion in funds had been issued, but $659 billion had actually been allocated. So there actually remained $125 billion that businesses did not apply for or were not funded with. So there was remaining funding last year. It just was in that later round. What is unknown is how long this round is going to last and what the need represented is going to be. I did see an announcement that came through from the American Bankers Association today that said through this past Sunday, so essentially the first week of funding that was available in this new round, there were 60,000 PPP loans approved, which equated to $5 billion in funding. However, just to keep that in mind, it was only some very targeted lenders that were allowed to provide PPP approvals and funding last week. And this program opened up to smaller institutions on Friday last week, and it opened up to the remaining financial institutions, including US Bank, to start processing this week on Tuesday. US Bank's approach to all of this was as soon as we were eligible to start processing applications through the SBA portal, we opened up a digital application. It went live this Tuesday at 4 a.m. Pacific time, and we had many thousands of applications just in the first few hours that came through. The majority of them were PPP2 applications, meaning those entities had received PPP funding last year and were seeking support through another round of funding. US Bank's approach in this round is to make sure that we are accessible to every eligible entity out there. So that can range from sole proprietorships, independent contractors, nonprofits, and then the gamut of business entity types, much described in Lisa's presentation. At US Bank, we do not require any of those entities to be existing customers to be eligible to apply for that funding. And we have a very streamlined process. And so I encourage all of you, if you have interest in pursuing this funding, you can just go to our website, which is usbank.com/PPP, and there's a great deal of information, including the link to apply. We've spent a lot of time to be able to enhance our digital application in the last few months to be able to make it very intuitive and helpful to any entity that is interested. But we know, and in my discussions with a lot of business owners, there's still somewhat of a fear of going through a government funding application process and not necessarily understanding all of the terms and how to calculate what your loan amount would be. And so it's important to us that even though we have a digital application for our clients and prospective clients to go through, that we have our team of bankers available to assist in every step step of the process. We have technology that allows, if I'm a business owner, I'm interested in checking out the application and learning more, I can go to the US Bank website, but I can call my banker that I know. So you can call me. You guys will all have my contact information that will be part of the follow-up email from this webinar. And I can connect you with any of our team of bankers, and we can actually navigate the process with you while you're going through every step of our application. We can see exactly what you're seeing and guide you as to any questions that you may have to get your application in. Once our applications go in, we have a whole team on the back end that is going through and validating and getting your loan to a status where it would be then sent to SBA for final approval. And by allowing our digital process to occur this way, it allows us to get to funding in a more streamlined way than if we were doing it a one-by-one paper or PDF application process. All the questions are going to be very similar to the questions that are listed on the application out on the SBA website. So you can go out and check that out. We have links to that on our website. Again, usbank.com/PPP. And I think the most important thing I want to convey today is, we are all in this together, whatever bank that you work with. The goal is to really support all the entities that have the need and have experienced some challenges and are seeking relief. The funding is available as of now. I cannot promise that it's going to be available for the next 3 months. We really just don't know. We know that if it's not all utilized, the program will end March 31st unless new legislation extends it. And so I would encourage anyone, if you have concerns and you're not familiar with the process, please just get in contact with a banker and we will walk you through the process. We really want to make sure this funding is accessible. The more opportunities that our local businesses and nonprofits have to seek this relief, the more financially and economically successful our community will be. So please don't be afraid. We are here to help. And again, usbank.com/PPP. There will be a lot of information that hopefully will be able to help you. And reach out to any of us. We have bankers in all of our branches here in Central and Eastern Oregon, and everyone is trained on how to guide you through the process. And I will personally connect you with one of our bankers if you reach out to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. All right, we have a growing list of questions, so I'm going to get right into it. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. The first question has come up in actually from a couple of folks, and it involves businesses who have, let me see if Megan, let's see, how do I apply for a PPP2 if you have more than 300 employees, but not more than 500 in any one physical location? Do you submit an application for each location? Take that.
I guess I'll
Go ahead.
sort of jump in there. So if it's a PPP2, it's only 300 per physical location, or if you have more than one, you start with the NACES code 72, then you can have 300 per location. So if you own a restaurant and you have 3 of them and they all have 250 employees, you're going to submit one application. You're going to put your true amount of employee count, and then whomever you're working with should be able to understand what's going on there. So you don't submit them for each separate one because it's going to roll through your EIN number. So if you have one EIN for 3 locations, the loan has to be one to cover everybody.
So will your advice be pick the location where you are most financially impacted?
It's based off of payroll. So you'd end up assuming 3 restaurants. You're going to take the average payroll of the 3 restaurants. On your application, you're going to put in 600 employees, and your lender should catch it, and it will be fine.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. All right. good question here. Do 1099 contractors qualify this round for PPP? This is a question I hear from a lot of folks out there. Most of their staff at this particular location are independent contractors. Anybody want to take that? Perhaps Lisa, you can.
Sure. Yeah, 1099 contractors are eligible to file for their own PPP loan, PPP 1 or 2, depending on, I mean, if they've already had a PPP 1, they can have a 2.
Mhm. Good. Okay.
The only thing to add to that real quick is if you're a 1099, you have your Schedule C, it's your line 31. Your line 31 is your net income. Divide that by 12, times it by 2.5. That's your loan amount. It's not the top line amount. It's not what your 1099 says. It's that bottom line 31 on your Schedule C.
Okay. So here's another specific question. A business was bought in November and got the first PPP loan in February. We'd like to apply for another loan, but we have a new EIN and it tells us we don't qualify because we weren't in business before from February to November. Whoa, that's a tough one. Anybody want to take that?
And if nobody else wants to. So if I'm understanding, we bought the business in November of 2020. Is that correct? Or are we saying November of 19?
It looks like in November, it doesn't say, that
Okay.
got the first PPP loan in February.
Okay, so
So
assume it's
It probably
November of
was
2019.
Yeah.
So you got it in 19, you switched your EIN number. The honest truth is it's going to get kicked out of the system, whoever you end up working with at this point. So the go-to answer is we have to wait for guidance to be released from SBA on how we cope with that situation. Whomever that individual is, you're not alone. It's coming up over and over again. So just patience is the name of the game in that situation. Stay close to your banker, whoever it is that you work with. So that way, as soon as guidance is released, you can get in the portal and get shaken.
Thank you. Another question. I'm in accommodation vacation rentals that have discovered that their NAICS code should start with 72, but it's been listed as number 53, which is the long-term rental category. Oops. Should I have my accountant change this on the 2019 federal taxes? What advice would you give to them?
Does anybody else? I don't mean to overtake this whole thing.
Go for it, Ashley.
Okay. The answer is the IFR states that we have to go off of your last tax return. So whatever your code is on your tax return is what's going to pivot your loan amount. So call your CPA right now and amend your tax returns. So that way you have a code 72. We're coming up against this an additional example is I am a grocery store that I'm a deli market. And people also seem to hang out and have lunch. So I serve food, so I'm a 72, right? I'm a restaurant, actually coded as meat manufacturer, whatever fun code they else want to have. We have to stick with what's on the tax return right now. With the information we have, SBA could come out with something fancy down the road, as Wendy and Lisa have explained. This game pivots often. So, but right now it's tax return, last filed tax return.
We might need to call the CPAs and give them a heads up based on your statement, Ashley. I don't know how widespread that is, but.
Yeah, sorry, CPAs.
No. So I just got clarification on that last question I asked. They actually started their businesses in November 2020, not 2019.
Then you just count your lucky stars because you were never eligible for the first drop PPP because you had to be in business February 15 of 2020 to be eligible. So I think you slid in under the rug on that one and just be grateful. You're kind of out of luck for this next one then.
All right. In 2019, we were a sole proprietor cash reporting. In 2020, we moved to an LLC, accrual reporting. How do we accurately compare revenues between these 2 years? Also, 2 different EINs. We received a PPP loan last year, but paid it back in full 3 days after receipt. Wendy, do you want to take this one?
If I'm not mistaken, if they paid it back in full 3 days after receipt, that would allow them to be eligible now for a PPP 1, based on my understanding of that. But I'll ask Ashley and Lisa to chime in. And if that's the case, they wouldn't have to prove out the 25% decrease in revenue.
Lisa?
I'm kind of going with what Wendy said. If they paid it back, then they're eligible for a PPP 1. Not sure how they compare the accrual to cash accounting. Ashley?
Well, Ashley froze up, but I will say we've been working with clients to ask them to true it up, cash to cash or accrual to accrual. Obviously, there's a lot of noise and movement that can happen in the numbers if you go from one to the other. So, if it's QuickBooks or whatever software an owner uses, we can work with them or get them the right people to help them do that. But we are looking for the cash to cash or accrual to accrual year over year.
Yeah, and I'll just add, because as people have a lot of great questions that are specific to their situations, I think there's a lot of nuance to this, and each bank that is processing these does have access to resources within the SBA to get interpretation as needed if it's something unusual that's really gray based on the guidance. And so I would recommend for some of these very specific questions to make sure to reach out to your banker to have them work to give you some more clarity as they can access those additional resources. And keep in mind, per what Ashley shared as well, there's guidance that's coming out and changing daily related to this. And so we're learning and trying to interpret at the bank as quickly as we can to be able to provide guidance to our customers. But we all have resources, again, that we sometimes need to lean on to provide more clarity to a particular situation. And so your best bet is to make sure that you get yourself connected to a banker who can make sure that they're diving in and getting the accurate guidance for you.
Yeah, that's good advice. Just a further clarification, I think I know the answer to this, but 1099s, contract workers, can you not claim them as an employee?
Not.
That's what I thought. All right. So there's a couple of questions in the queue about the seasonal information, Ashley, that you brought up earlier. Rather than repeating the whole thing over again, because that information is you can go back on YouTube. A little bit of clarification. You said it could be it's a 12-week segment of time that's over the course of a year. So if you were a seasonal employer and you were trying to evaluate, so what period of time, what 12-week period of time do I apply for this? Kind of walk us through briefly what process you would go through to prepare and identify what months, what 12-week period and why.
Mm-hmm. So first step is make sure that you truly are seasonal. And on the link that Lisa had to the Treasury site, you're looking for, they call it an IFR, interim final rule. It's page 26 is the definition of seasonal employee. So first, let's make sure you're eligible. Second, we're assuming you're eligible. 2, if it was me, I mean, this is Ashley, not Summit Bank talking, I would find the 12-week period that has the highest payroll. I would. And then I would make sure that I'm comfortable spending whatever amount that is. And it's 12-week period from February 15 of of 2019 to February 15 of 2020. I'd find out where my 12-week window is that gives me the highest payroll. Then I take a second look at, I pretend like I'm applying for forgiveness for a second. Make sure, can I really spend 60% of that on payroll? Okay, check that box. Can I really spend the other 40 in these other buckets? Check that box. That would be, if I was a ski operator person, that's what I would do. You don't have to justify to me what 12-week period. I don't have, it's not any banker's place to judge you on your 12 weeks. That's you.
No judging here. Anybody else want to add anything to that, to the seasonal? Okay, because that's a big deal in this community, for sure. Another question here in the queue, Lisa, or whoever wants to answer this. Somebody is asking, I didn't see a two-parter question, to maintain FTE, are FTEs based on the day that the PPP2 is funded?
There's a comparison period. Ashley, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, so at forgiveness, what the question is basically when you get to the forgiveness stage of this fund cycle, you have to do some kind of FTE comparison. With this new IFR, good grief, we love our acronyms in SBA. Well, you get to choose 2 periods, assuming that you're not seasonal, that you're going to compare your FTE count to. The 2 periods, I'm going to read really quick, is either February 15, 2019 through June 30, 2019. So that's like your starting base. Or you can choose January 1 of 2020 through February 29 of 2020. So you're going to step on that base. How many employees did I have? And then we're going to fast forward to the end of your covered period between 8 and 24 weeks and figure out how many employees are there. If it's the same number, winner, winner. If it's not, as Lisa alluded to earlier, there's some safe harbors. The great thing about this time around, I would just add, is we actually know what forgiveness looks like. When we all jumped in the water last time, we weren't sure if it was lava or hot chocolate or vodka at that point. I mean, we knew. This time we know what it is. So, and they updated the forms. So again, kind of not to keep plugging everybody's websites, but go online and pretend like you're applying for forgiveness and kind of walk through those hurdles because we already know what it looks like. So that would be my recommendation.
Anybody want to add to that? We're good. So can I dwell just a moment on this forgivable loan? I'd love to hear from you folks on what we did learn the last time around. What certainty do we have going into this time around on what is and is not forgivable? And your level of confidence and just kind of communicate, if you are a business, what do you think is going to be the most important thing to remember if you are really hoping that you don't have to pay this back? Lisa, do you want to go first?
Sure. Basically, pay attention to the rules. It's minimum of 60% is payroll, and the other 40% are on those eligible expenses. Little thing that I had heard on the side, and Ashley might want to chime in on this. Apparently, the the employee retention tax credits cannot overlap your PPP expense period. Do you know anything about that?
Honestly, I'm going to have to punt to somebody else. I don't even play a CPA on TV, so I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's something that you need to talk to your CPA about because that could make a big difference because the employee retention tax credits apparently have gone way up this time around, and that's something you definitely want to talk to your bookkeeping and payroll people about.
Anything else, Wendy?
I think a couple of things, I would recommend to every business owner to keep very good records of how you're spending your money. And especially if there are nuances to how you do your accounting for your business, because businesses they can keep accounting in a lot of different ways. And if they're affiliated to the other different entities and the way that they move the money between them, it's not always easy to navigate. And so for a business owner to really be able to keep track and explain and follow the money of how they're spending it is a very good idea regardless. So that would be my number one. And then number two, back to what I said earlier, where the SBA continues to come out with revised guidance, and then that's been coupled with new legislation that has changed the rules. And so some businesses that jumped early to apply for forgiveness didn't necessarily have as much flexibility as businesses who waited. And so you certainly need to apply within the timeline in which has been given, but there has been more flexibility that has come about. I know with this newest round of legislation, US Bank closed our forgiveness portal to make sure that we were incorporating all of the new rules for forgiveness that would be more lenient to businesses before we reopen it. So talk to your banker and just ask those questions, because it didn't always pay off for businesses to apply for forgiveness early in the process.
Really good advice. Ashley, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I agree with what our other two panelists have shared. The only bit I would add is I feel like forgiveness is the part that nobody wants to like think about. The money applying is one hurdle, then we have to go for forgiveness. What we recommend is there's 3 forgiveness forms. Don't look at the big one yet, and look at the one that's called the 3508E. It's kind of like what would be referred to as kind of like the middle one. Go to the instructions, which now it's brand new, so it's embedded in there. And there's 3 reasons why you could use that form. Read those 3 reasons. Most of our clients, so we are almost 90% through forgiveness of our original 2020 loans. So, and all of them are forgiven. So yay for us. But we have our clients look at those 3 reasons. If it is very rare that you would not be able to utilize that easy form, very rare. So if you look at the larger form, you're going to it's going to be nauseating. Check the easy, read that box, and then I think it's going to give everybody a little bit of comfort knowing if we're going to get into this forgiveness PPP dance period, there are some safe harbors like Lisa alluded to that really this is not meant as a gotcha game. Nobody wants a 1% loan. Nobody does. This is not a loan program. It's a stimulus program. Happens to be under the umbrella of a loan program, but look at that. I think that will make everybody breathe a little bit better in getting into this. I think unless Gary, do you have anything you want to add? I know we're 2 minutes out.
Well said. No, I really like that. Look at the forgiveness forms, because that will determine what you do going forward. Follow the rules and watch the forgiveness and know what you need to do to get there.
No, I think the panel covered it. In short, don't let up the get funded. Keep your records, keep track of expenditures, keep your forms, and that'll be a lot less work than having to pick up the pieces several weeks or months down the line, depending on the period in which you covered it well.
Really good advice. And I know I talked to a lot of people out there who, the wonderful world of federal loans and grant applications is not a world a lot of us have been in. Honestly, there is a learning curve and collectively that has been 90 degrees this year for a lot of people who've dipped into a federal loan for the first time. It isn't easy. Get some advice. These people on this panel are just a few of the folks who can give that advice to you and get you through it and get your ducks in a row so that you're not surprised by anything nasty that you have to pay back at the end of this if it's not necessary. So another thing before I let everybody go too is the federal government said that you don't have to pay federal taxes on your last loans that you received, but the jury's still out with the state. And the legislature in 2021 in the state of Oregon is contemplating decoupling from the federal government and is contemplating being able to tax that money that you received. So keep that in mind when you have this money. I hate to say it, but always look over your shoulder, because if there is something going on that could tap into it and you haven't planned ahead for that contingency, just be aware that things like that could happen from time to time. And at the state level is the one I just want to put a little bit of warning out. It will be decided probably in the next few months as to whether or not the state will tax their portion of your PPP loan, your federal grants. So, ouch, but we're working on that as a chamber. All right, well, we are out of time, and I am so glad we got to answer so many very specific questions. This was really useful for me, I know. I appreciate all of you joining. Thanks again to Bed Broadband for helping us make this happen and bringing it to you. This will come out in a follow-up email to all of you so you can replay all these happy moments later on and get that information you may not have been able to jot down in time. Please feel free to share it with other businesses and get the word out on this great program. Thanks everybody for attending today. Wishing you luck and have a great weekend coming up. Take care.